enriched. So giving Iran's nuclear policy to some American politician is not going to be acceptable either.
Now, when the negotiations started, the American line was slightly different. Why do you think the Americans have now changed their stance, where earlier the line that was taken by Donald Trump was that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, except for that, Iran can do what it wants? But why do you think the Americans are now saying, especially Steve Witkoff, that even a civil nuclear program by Iran is no longer acceptable for the Americans?
This is due to Israeli pressure. In fact, today they are starting a new round of talks in Rome. You have the Iranian team on one side, and then you have Steve Witkoff, plus two Israeli officials on the other side. Mm-hmm. So the Israelis are not shy about showing that they're influencing U.S. policy, and they have been saying for the last 20 years that Iran is 6 months away from a nuclear weapon. So whenever they say that, people generally laugh, because if Iran wanted to make a nuclear weapon 20 years ago, Iran actually could. This is not Iran's policy to do that. And in order to make sure that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, the Trump administration could either go back to the old agreement, mm-hmm. or they can have a new agreement making sure that Iran's enrichment is at low levels. The only way you can make sure of that is to have an agreement with Iran. Right. But if they want to have maximalist goals, it's not going to work.
Right. Now, at the time when these negotiations are taking place between Iran and the United States, the fact is there are reports which state that Israel under Netanyahu is coming up with plans to carry out a unilateral attack on Iran's nuclear sites. How does Iran view these reports that the Israelis are plotting for unilateral attacks on the Iranian nuclear sites? Because once they start these attacks, then the Americans will also jump on the bandwagon.
Well, Israel is a genocidal regime. They're killing an average of 20 children on a daily basis in Palestine for the last 19 months. They are capable of engaging in genocide against other nations, other countries. Mm-hmm. So Iranian leaders take those threats seriously. Iran's foreign minister wrote a letter to the UN Security Council yesterday, highlighting the fact that threatening Iran in that manner is against international law. Right. And Israelis cannot actually have any successful attack on Iran's nuclear sites without the U.S. help. So in that letter, Iran foreign minister says that they would hold Americans responsible, right, if Israelis attack Iran. Oh. You know, Americans have about 50,000 troops in this part of the world. There are 10 places that Americans are concentrated in, their military bases. And they will be vulnerable to Iranian response if they attack Iran.
All right. Now, my final question to you, Professor, is this. You know, the fact that there was already an Iranian nuclear deal, it was called the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. It was struck between Iran and 6 world powers led by the United States of America. But in 2018, it was Donald Trump who unilaterally chose to walk away from that agreement, describing it to be the worst negotiated agreement ever in American history. And now there's a lot of confusion as to how different this nuclear deal would be if it is successfully negotiated by the Americans. Why do you think Iranians can trust Donald Trump this time around? And why do you think that the Iranians can be confident enough that another subsequent American president would not unilaterally, again, walk away from an agreement that could be struck now?
You know, there's this American saying that if you fool me once, shame on you. If you fool me twice, shame on me. Mm-hmm. But this time around, with the same guy, Iranians are going to be much more cautious about dealing with the United States. They are going to demand guarantees to make sure that the sanctions against Iran are going to be fully lifted. And they're going to remind Trump that that policy that he had during his first term failed, because the policy was that the U.S. would get out of the nuclear agreement, then they would exercise maximum pressure on Iran, economic pressure, political pressure, and then they would overthrow the government.
Right.
And this was many years ago. The Iranian government continues to resist these pressures and continues to grow. So when you have a failed policy, you need to change it. And the hope is that the Trump administration realizes that they shouldn't be following the failed policies of the past.
All right, we'll have to leave there. Thank you very much indeed, Professor, for joining us with that perspective there.
This is breaking news coming in from Washington, and Trump has warned Netanyahu against striking Iran. The U.S. president made the announcement from the White House. This came after reports said that President Trump cautioned Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in a phone call last week not to take any action that could jeopardize negotiations between the U.S. and Iran on a new nuclear deal. Trump and other senior U.S. officials have grown concerned in recent weeks that Israel might bomb Iran's nuclear facilities or take other steps that could undermine the talks. U.S. intelligence agencies assessed that Israel could execute a strike within 7 hours of Netanyahu's order, giving Washington little or no time to intervene. The growing rift between Trump and Netanyahu is now prompting urgent, high-level talks between senior officials from both countries. The development also overlaps with ongoing nuclear deal talks between the U.S. and Iran. Tehran and Washington are expected to hold a 6th round of talks to solve a decades-long dispute over Iran's nuclear program.
Now, Trump has warned Netanyahu against striking Iran. The U.S. president made the announcement from White House. And this came after reports said that President Trump cautioned Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in a phone call last week not to take any action that could jeopardize negotiations between the U.S. and Iran on a new nuclear deal.
Back on Iran, did you warn Prime Minister Netanyahu against taking some sort of actions that could disrupt the talks there in a phone call last week?
Well, I'd like to be honest. Yes, I did. Next question, please.
Just last on sanctions.
I did, yeah.
If Senate Republicans want to push
It's not a warning. I said I don't think it's appropriate.
What exactly did you tell him? Did you
I just said I don't think it's appropriate. We're having very good discussions with him, and I said I don't think it's appropriate right now.
Well, the U.S. president didn't go further on the issue, but revealed that he is indeed holding talks with his Israeli counterparts. Trump and other senior U.S. officials have grown concerned in recent weeks that Israel might bomb Iran's nuclear facilities or take other steps that could undermine the talks. U.S. intelligence agencies assess that Israel could execute a strike within 7 hours of Netanyahu's order, giving Washington little or no time to intervene. The growing rift between Trump and Netanyahu is now prompting urgent high-level talks between senior officials from both the countries. The development also overlaps with ongoing nuclear deal talks between U.S. and Iran. Tehran and Washington are expected to hold a 6th round of talks to solve a decades-long dispute over Iran's nuclear program.
Now, Iran has said that it has not received any written proposal in negotiations with the United States about its nuclear program. This after the U.S. President Donald Trump claimed that the Iranians do have a proposal. Hours after Trump's remarks, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said on a post on X that Iran has not received any written proposal from the United States, directly or indirectly. He added that an agreement can be reached if Washington lifts sanctions and respects, I'm quoting here, our rights, including to enrich uranium. Araghchi said there is no scenario in which Iran will abandon its hard-earned right to enrichment for peaceful purposes. Earlier, Trump told reporters aboard Air Force One after departing the United Arab Emirates that Iran had a U.S. proposal about its nuclear program. He also threatened that Tehran needs to move quickly to resolve a decades-long dispute or something bad is going to happen.
On Iran, has the U.S. given them a formal proposal? Has Steve Witkoff handed that over?
Yeah, they have a proposal, but more importantly, they know they have to move quickly. Something bad's going to happen. Thank you very much.
How's Tiffany doing?
Later, Trump reiterated in an interview with Fox News that a new nuclear deal with Iran is close.
So many Iranians from New York, from Washington, from a different place. These are great people. You know, you have to view them as people. And I don't want it to be a violent thing, but they're not going to have a nuclear weapon.
But you said it was close the other day. You said it was close to a deal.
I think it's close. I think,
so does that mean that they're going to enrich at any level, like a civilian level?
No, I think they want to make a deal.
Meanwhile, Iran met with European powers on Friday to discuss its nuclear negotiations with Washington. The meeting in Istanbul followed remarks by Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi warning of irreversible consequences if Britain, France and Germany move to reimpose United Nations sanctions that were lifted under a landmark 2015 agreement. Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Kazim Garibabadi, who attended the talks, said, and I'm quoting yet again, "We exchanged views and discussed the latest status of the indirect nuclear negotiations and the lifting of sanctions." He added that if necessary, Tehran would meet again with the European parties to the 2015 deal, along with China, Russia and the US to continue discussions after several meetings since last year. Trump had torpedoed the Iranian deal during his first term by unilaterally abandoning it in 2018 and reimposing sanctions on Iran's banking sector and oil exports.
Israel might plan to strike Iran soon. U.S. officials have reportedly obtained new intelligence that Israel is preparing to strike Iranian nuclear facilities. A CNN report claims that it's not clear that Israeli leaders have made a final decision or not, but there is deep disagreements within the U.S. government about the likelihood that Israel will ultimately act. However, U.S. officials have reportedly claimed that the chances of an Israeli strike on an Iranian nuclear facility had gone up significantly in recent months. And according to the report, the heightened worries stem not only from public and private messagings from senior Israeli officials, but also Israel's military movements. Among the military preparations the U.S. has observed are the movement of air munitions and the completion of an air exercise, all developments suggesting that an Israeli strike on Iran could be imminent. Such a strike would be a brazen break with President Donald Trump's continued nuclear negotiations with Tehran. It could also risk tipping off a broader regional conflict in West Asia, something the U.S. has sought to avoid since the war in Gaza inflamed tensions beginning in 2023. However, Israel's decision to strike Iran heavily depends on Washington's nuclear deal with Tehran, with Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei cautioning that it's very unlikely there will be positive outcomes out of nuclear talks with the United States. So the stakes are now higher than ever, and West Asia, or the Middle East, again stands at the edge of a cliff.
Tensions in West Asia continue to rise further. Reports emerging from the United States suggest that Israel may be gearing up for a strike on Iranian nuclear infrastructure. So while Washington continues down the diplomatic path with Tehran, Tel Aviv right now appears to be exploring a very different course. According to a CNN report, Israel has ramped up activities that resemble preparations for a military operation targeting Iran's nuclear capabilities. And these developments emerge at a time when the Trump administration is aiming to close a nuclear deal with Tehran that's over its nuclear program. The report further claims that these moves by Israel may not only affect Washington and Tehran's diplomatic channels, but might also ignite a broader regional conflict across West Asia. The report claims although Israeli leadership has not made a final call, uncertainty clouds the situation. Some U.S. officials believe internal divisions in Israel could still restrain military action against Iran, while others believe the odds of an Israeli airstrike have surged majorly in recent months. Potential Israeli strikes reportedly depend on the outcomes of the nuclear talks between Washington and Tehran. If Tel Aviv concludes that Washington's deal will not fully eliminate Iran's nuclear potential, then Israel could take matters into its own hands. American surveillance has reportedly picked up Israeli military movements and intercepted communications, fueling that belief that plans for a strike are under serious consideration in Israel. Reports note that the transfer of aerial munitions and the conclusion of a major air exercise as indicators of offensive military planning. Last month, on the directions of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Air Force conducted drills rehearsing for another round of Iranian missile attacks on Israeli air bases. The CNN report further states that all these steps by Israel might still be a bluff designed to perhaps rattle Iran into compliance without actually pulling the trigger. U.S. President Donald Trump has made it very clear that he is willing to use force if diplomacy fails. He has previously warned Tehran of military consequences should it defy U.S. efforts to reach a nuclear accord. According to the report, Israel does not have the capacity to destroy Iran's nuclear sites or nuclear program without American help. And that includes mid-air refueling and bombs that could penetrate Iranian nuclear facilities lying deep underground. Prior U.S. intelligence assessment indicated that Israel could use either military aircraft or long-range missiles to strike Iran's nuclear sites. However, these assessments concluded the strikes will have little to negligible impact. Incidentally, in April, the New York Times also reported that Israel planned to strike Iranian nuclear sites as soon as May, but that plan was thwarted by Trump, who opted in favor of negotiating a deal with Tehran.
A new round of high-stakes talks between the United States and Iran set to take place in Rome on Friday. Both countries have confirmed their attendance following mediation efforts led by Oman, and this will be the fifth round of nuclear negotiations since April 12, marking the highest level contact between the U.S. and Iran since U.S. President Donald Trump abandoned the 2015 nuclear deal during his first term in 2018. The talks aim at a new agreement that would basically curb Iran's nuclear activities in return for sanctions relief. Western countries, including the U.S., have long accused Iran of seeking to acquire atomic weapons, while Iran insists its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes. Both sides, however, remain deeply divided on one critical issue: uranium enrichment. Iran currently enriches uranium up to 60% purity, far above the 3.67% cap set by the 2015 nuclear deal, but still below the 90% needed for a nuclear weapon. The Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and senior leaders cast doubts on the talks, calling the effort unlikely to yield results. He also called denying Iran's right to enrich uranium a big mistake.
We have previously responded to these unreasonable demands. Repeating an unrealistic, illogical, and irrational position does nothing to legitimize that stance. No matter how many times American officials repeat it, it will not change the essence of the matter. Our position is completely clear. I have stated it clearly before, and I repeat it. Uranium enrichment in Iran will continue, with or without an agreement.
This comes after U.S. key negotiator Steve Witkoff voiced opposition to any Iranian uranium enrichment and said that an enrichment program can never exist in Iran again. The U.S. has maintained that any deal must eliminate Iran's capacity to enrich uranium, a demand Iran calls non-negotiable. Meanwhile, according to Axios, Israel is preparing for a possible strike on Iranian nuclear sites if the Rome talks collapse. It says Israeli forces have ramped up military drills and are preparing for a week-long military campaign if diplomacy fails. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that while Israel will welcome an Iran nuclear deal, it will retain its right to defend itself if the need arises.
Iran remains a very serious threat to Israel. We are, of course, in full coordination with the United States. We are talking to them all the time, and we hope that if they can reach an agreement that will prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon, that means that it will prevent Iran from being able to enrich uranium. If this is certainly achieved, we will of course welcome it. But in any case, the State of Israel reserves the right to defend itself against a regime that threatens to destroy us.
With Israel on high alert and red lines drawn on both sides, the Friday meeting could determine not just the future of Iran's nuclear program, but also of peace and conflict in the region.
As Iran holds nuclear talks with the Americans, the Israelis are preparing munitions and planning to strike Iranian nuclear facilities. Now, what are the prospects of that? And what are the cracks within the U.S. and Israel ranks regarding the Iranian nuclear program? We tell you.
The United States and Iran are locked in marathon nuclear negotiations. Sticking to predefined red lines, each side appears to rule out the possibility of a negotiated solution to the future of Iran's nuclear program.
Why do you think they are negotiating with us? Because they were disappointed that their cruel sanctions would not bring the Iranian people and the Iranian government to their knees. If they were sure that they could bring us to our knees, they would not negotiate. They would have told themselves that we would wait, and in a few months they would surrender and move forward. But they saw that this would not happen because of the strength of the Iranian people.
The United States is firm on its demand that Iran must stop domestic uranium enrichment, a right Tehran believes it has under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Trump administration believes that Iran's weapons-grade program leaves scope for Tehran to achieve nuclear heights. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff recently said, "The United States will not allow Iran to have even 1% enrichment capacity. The stakes to secure the nuclear deal have never been higher." The 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that Trump backed out of in his first term expires in October this year. Reports suggest that Iran's enemy and Washington's ally, Israel, is ready to strike the Islamic Republic if the deal doesn't come through.
Iran remains a very serious threat to Israel. We are, of course, in full coordination with the United States. We are talking to them all the time. And we hope that if they can reach an agreement that will prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon, that means that it will prevent Iran from being able to enrich uranium. If this is certainly achieved, we will of course welcome it. But in any case, the State of Israel reserves the right to defend itself against a regime that threatens to destroy us.
Reports indicate that Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu's administration is waiting for the talks to collapse, giving him a window to target Iran's nuclear facilities. A CNN report claims it is not clear if Israeli leaders have made a final decision, but there is deep disagreement within the U.S. government about the likelihood that Israel will ultimately act. U.S. officials have reportedly claimed the chances of an Israeli strike on an Iranian nuclear facility have gone up significantly in recent months. According to the report, the heightened worries stem not only from public and private messaging from senior Israeli officials, but also Israel's military movements. Among the military preparations the U.S. has observed are the movement of air munitions and the completion of an air exercise. All developments suggest an Israeli strike on Iran could be imminent. Such a strike will be a brazen break with President Donald Trump's continued nuclear negotiations with Tehran. It could also risk tipping off a broader regional conflict in West Asia, something the U.S. has sought to avoid since the war in Gaza inflamed tensions beginning in 2023. In addition, other countries in the region are worried that an Israeli strike that would likely provoke a war could release radioactive material that will spread across the area.
Hello and welcome to this special broadcast from WION. My name is Mohammed Saleh. Now, the Iran-US negotiations for a potential nuclear deal have reached a crucial red line. Now, Donald Trump's special representative for the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, has said that Iran needs to completely give up its nuclear program. But for the Iranians, this is effectively a deal breaker. So the question is this: is there a way out of this impasse? Now, why is the nuclear program so important for the Iranians, and why has the Trump administration now again taken a hard line where it does not want to accept even a civil nuclear program for the Iranians? And more importantly, what role is the state of Israel playing in these negotiations from behind the scenes? There are reports that state that Israel may stage a unilateral attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, even without the Americans initially being on board this plan. Now, to discuss the nitty-gritties of these issues, we are joined this broadcast by Professor Fouad Zadi, who's an associate professor and faculty of world studies at the University of Tehran. He's joining us live on this broadcast. Now, Professor, this is a crucial moment in these negotiations because the Americans over the course of the last week have hardened their position, where Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's Middle East envoy, now says that it is not acceptable for the for the Iranians to have even a civil nuclear program. How does Tehran respond to this hard line taken by the Americans?
You know, this was an issue 10 years ago, 2015, at the original nuclear agreement. Americans initially said the same thing. They're not going to allow Iran to have a civilian nuclear program enriching inside the country. And then after they realized that that is not going to happen, that Iran's red line is actually a serious red line, then they changed their mind. And so in the 2015 agreement, Iran managed to continue enriching 3.67, and there was no problem with that. Iran did not build a nuclear weapon with that level of enrichment because it is not possible physically to build a nuclear weapon with 3.67 enrichment. In order to build a nuclear weapon, you need to enrich over 90%. And Iran has never done that. And under that original agreement, there were very extensive inspections of Iran's nuclear sites. So if Iran decided to one day enrich more than that minimum level, everybody would know, and then the consequences would be good for Iran. So if what Trump says should be taken in its face value, Trump says that he doesn't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Reaching an agreement should not be difficult because you can enrich and not have a nuclear weapon. In fact, we have Germany, we have Holland.
If I can just interject you there, that's your opinion where you say reaching an agreement should not be difficult. But the fact is, according to reports, the Iranians are reported to have enriched uranium to as much as about 60% purity. And a lot of experts are saying that, you know, if they can do it till 60%, then it would not be hard for them to reach 90% purity. The question that I'm asking you is this: why is even a civil nuclear program so important for the Iranians that they are willing, that they're possibly, you know, inviting a sort of a war that the Americans, or at least the Israelis, want to wage on Iran to try and destroy Iran's nuclear assets?
It is true that after the United States left the agreement in 2018, the U.S. was in the agreement for 3 years. When Trump became president last time, he left the agreement. And what happened at that time was that Iran decided to enrich more to show the fact that Iran is able to enrichment at 60%. And Iran can go back to 3.67%. And the reason this is important to Iran is that Iran does not want to be singled out. You know, Iran has a very old civilization. Iran is a proud country. Iran needs enrichment inside the country because we have had experiences of trying to buy enriched uranium from outside, and because of U.S. pressure, no country would sell enriched uranium to us. As I was saying, we have many countries in the world that are enriching at civilian levels, and they don't have a nuclear weapon, like Germany, like Holland, like Brazil, like Argentina, like Japan, like South Korea, and others. And Iran wants to be a normal country like other countries. And Iran is a member of NPT. We are a member of NPT under Article 4, you can enrich. So giving Iran's nuclear policy to some American politician is not going to be acceptable either.
Now, when the negotiations started, the American line was slightly different. Why do you think the Americans have now changed their stance, where earlier the line that was taken by Donald Trump was that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, except for that, Iran can do what it wants? But why do you think the Americans are now saying, especially Steve Witkoff, that even a civil nuclear program by Iran is no longer acceptable for the Americans?